Hi guys, welcome back. So a friend of mine asked me how you replace the thermal paste on the old PlayStation 4, so I thought about making a video to help you with the complete disassembly and indication on how to replace the thermal paste on your old PS4, so the standard model. So this is my old one, it's a day one, and you can see from the glossy surface of the hard disk cover, the upper cover, and I will just make a quick guide and give you some indication on how to better clean the system and replace the thermal paste. So usually the reason to do so is the usual, my PS4 is quite noisy, is there something I can do? I would say that cleaning your PS4 regularly, and by regularly I mean at least once a year, is always a good idea depending on how dusty your environment is. About the thermal paste, yes, I mean once you're disassembling your PS4, especially if you do a complete disassembly, it is really quick to replace your thermal paste and it's not a bad idea. This said, it's not like it's something you have to do. So normally the thermal paste should last you something like 3 to 4, 5 years before becoming more dry and solid. So if your PS4 is really noisy, it is a good maintenance operation to clean everything and replace the thermal paste while you're doing it. But it is not always the solution to your problem, because you might have a faulty fan or something else might be going on with your system. So this said, I recommend that you clean your PS4 at least once a year from the dust. If you're not confident about replacing the thermal paste, do not worry. It's not something you must do. It's something you can try to do if you have some experience while you're just disassembling your system. So what will you require? You will require a screwdriver. We will see while we remove the components how much screw types you will encounter. Then I would recommend also to use some compressed air, either if you have a compressor or if you have some canned compressed air to clean the electronics. A cloth or something to remove the dust. Something like an old toothbrush, it's something I really use. And then some isopropyl alcohol, which is the best one for cleaning electronics because it really dries out really quick, so it evaporates really quickly. But any alcohol which does not damage your electronics, like normal cleaning alcohol, it probably will be okay. Then you will need some Q-tips, we will find them later. And finally your thermal paste. So what thermal paste should you use? I normally use this Arctic Silver, this is the 5, but any Arctic product will be, it's a really good thermal paste manufacturing company, so any high-end thermal paste is recommended, because honestly this one, which will serve you maybe 10 times for the area of the APU of the PS4, is about €7, so that's $7, something like that. So honestly, don't go cheap on your thermal paste. So my recommendation is this one. It's a really good one. It depends. Basically, thermal pastes are different depending on the metals they put inside, because the purpose of the thermal paste, we will see later when we disassemble the PS4, is to create a conductive layer between the heatsink and the APU, so the microcontroller, the microprocessor itself, which has a surface which is not perfectly flat, and also the heatsink surface, which is usually aluminum or another highly conductive metal, is not perfectly flat. So thermal paste is a thermally conductive paste, which is usually comprised also of metal, and its purpose is to basically ensure the contact and the transmissibility of the heat between the microcontroller, microprocessor, APU, whatever it is, and the metal of the heatsink. Another thing is, like you will probably see, I'm wearing gloves. That's, I mean, primarily to avoid to dirty up my PS4 while I'm disassembling it, but also to protect the electronics from electrostatic discharge. Because it's a good idea to ground yourself, especially if you have pets, if you come from the outside, before operating on your electronics, or just wear some gloves which will isolate your body from the electronics you're working on, because you can severely damage any electronic component with an electrostatic discharge. Okay, so now we will start with the disassembly of the PS4, and what you will need for this phase is a Torx screwdriver. The size is 9. And so the first thing you can do is to remove the cover, the upper cover of your PS4, and you just do it by pulling it upwards, and it snaps out like this, and that's something you can put aside. Inside you will find your hard disk drive, which you can easily remove. Maybe we will do it just shortly after removing the chassis screws. So okay, I hope you're able to see it correctly in the camera, but here there are 4 screws which are hidden behind stickers. Originally I already removed the stickers on mine when I first disassembled it. They are quite nasty, so use either a pair of pliers or a small plastic clip or something which can raise the sticker from the plastic without scratching it. And you just start your disassembly by removing these Torx screws 1, 2, 3 and 4 with a size 9 Torx screwdriver. So you just remove them, and then after a short time lapse, and you will have removed the 4 screws. So now a small advice I give you: when I do something like removing screws, to not lose them, you can either use a box or a small piece of tape where you basically stick your screws on so they don't get lost, and you also can remember the order, and you can mark with a pencil the strip and say, okay, these are the first screws, then the second, and then so you go on in time, and you know exactly the order in which you remove the screws. So now that you removed the chassis screws, we can also remove the hard disk drive with I think it's a 2.5 millimeters Phillips head. Okay, so like this, and you remove the big screw which holds the HDD in place, and there we go. Well, this one is really easy to recognize because it has all the PlayStation symbols on it. And then you just detach the HDD and you put it aside. Okay, so now we can proceed with the chassis disassembly, and you basically start from the back of the power unit side and you gently lift up. Okay, so there you go. I hope you were able to see it correctly. So you put your fingers underneath the back part and you just tilt it this way. It will come clean off. So this is the first thing. You can wash, clean, remove the dust. My PS4 I think will be quite clean because it has not been a long time since my last cleaning. So now this is all plastic, just a bit of shielding. You can see where the dust will gather, so that's what the airflow is, and you can remove it with a cloth or just give it a small blow with the compressed air and it will remove all the dust. So let's set this aside. So now we are presented with the power supply side of the PlayStation 4, and that's where we will begin to disassemble everything. So just so you know, this one is the power unit. Okay, so this is where the power converter is, which takes in the well, in my case it's 220 volts. If you live in the US, that's 110, and transforms it into the low voltage for the logical stuff. So, and this is where the dust will be gathered mostly. This is the fan, which basically blows the air, so sucks the air in from this side and then blows it outside to cool the power unit. So here you have the Blu-ray drive, I think, yes, which we will remove completely. It's a single unit. We have some ribbon cables which we will then disconnect, and you have the Wi-Fi module with its antenna. So the first thing we can start removing, again with the Torx screw, here it is the antenna. So one quick suggestion I give you is, if you never disassemble this, well, you have my video as a guide, but you can also take pictures with your phone of how stuff is assembled. So when you reassemble the system, you have a visual guide to how everything was in place. So now let's start by removing the antenna of the Wi-Fi module. That's one Torx screw. There we go. And it should come off. We will completely disconnect this one, just remove the cable and leave it aside. And then you can start by removing all the Torx screw you can see, plus these two screws for the power unit, which is the first thing we will remove. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws. A sixth is here for the Blu-ray drive, another one here, and then we will also remove the shielding and see if there are some more screws behind, because honestly I don't remember where all screws are. So just start again with the Torx screwdriver and remove these screws. I think they're all equal in size. Keep an eye out on the length of the screws, because there might be some screws which are of the same head but with different length, so you want to keep track of which is which, basically. These screws are all equal in size, so I'm not really particularly worried. And there we go, another Torx screw. And it seems like I got almost all of them. There's another one here. There we go. And now we take some more tape, and then we will switch to the Phillips head. Okay, so now here we go. I just got some more tape, and another item which will come in handy is a marker. Okay, I will tell you when we will use this, and you can guess already what we will use a marker for. So now I think this one will be a 2mm Phillips head. Those two which also have this nice metal clip. No, they are 2.5. So again, 2.5 Phillips screw head, and we will remove this and the other one. So whenever you're disassembling electronics, my suggestion is, if you're not confident, if you have no experience, just don't yank, pull, break, burn, whatever. I mean, if all stuff which is engineering for disassembly should be relatively easy if you know the right thing to do and the right order. So you should never have to use force or something like that. So now remove these long screws with the metal clip, which go all the way through, and also all the lower shield, the lower plastic frame. And now, so I remove also the metal shielding with this one. And I think now the power supply should be loose. Yes, it is, but as I just said, never yank things out, because probably there are connectors and cablings which are holding things in place. So now you will feel resistance in this point because there is like a blade, there are two blade connectors which connect the power supply to the motherboard, okay? So they are basically small metal blades which fit into a female connector on the power supply. So now you can actually yank slightly, that's not a lot of force, but you need to detach those connectors, so just use the right amount of force and it should come off. There we go. Okay, so you see it's not a massive, and we should now see them clearly. These two, I hope you can see them clearly, are the blades with which I just disconnected and which will offer some resistance when you pull apart the power supply. So now, as you can see, be careful because there is a connector. This is the motherboard. What you're seeing below here is the motherboard, and there is a connector. Okay, so I wanted to show you just in more detail the blade connector here on the power supply, and those black cables, this connector to the motherboard from the power supply to the motherboard, is the first thing you need to disconnect. So another recommendation, never yank these connectors from the cables. Just use maybe a flat screwdriver head or a plastic piece if you have one, that would be even better, and you just pull up on the plastic piece of the connector and it will come loose. These connectors are always a pain in the ass, but just be careful to not detach any of the cables from the connectors. So now we have completely disassembled the power supply. You can see it here, and this is a part which is usually really dusty inside. So now, as I told you, my PS4 is pretty clean, but probably inside here you will need to use some compressed air, give it a good blow. Okay, so just to show you something like this, and I remove the cap, and definitely some dust will come out of the back. This is normally where the airflow is, so I hope you're able to see everything correctly. And now I will put the power supply aside and show you the blade connector which we detached previously. So this one, those two blades here are the one which are fit inside the power supply and are the ones which will actually give you some resistance when you're working on this. Okay, so now we can proceed with the disassembly of the unit by removing the Blu-ray drive. Yep, we need to disassemble the Blu-ray drive unit. So now these connectors, you will find them all over the PS4, and they're really cool because here you can see this small metal part down here. This is actually a spring which holds the connector in place, and if you press down with your finger you will release the connectors, and you can just pull on the black tab and the connector will come off easily. So be really careful around these strip connectors because you don't want to damage any of them, and none of them should come separate from the connector by force. So just push down, like we can also try on this side, maybe you will see it better on the camera. You don't really need to disconnect this one, but anyway, so you push down on this small metal plate, it will release the connector, and then you just pull gently and it will come off. If you need to reinsert, you press down, push inside. There's a black line for reference which will tell you that the connector is fully inserted, and you release the spring, and now this is locked in place. If you pull, it will not come off. So you disconnect the Blu-ray drive connector, the driver, from the motherboard, and then there's a power cable down here. I hope you can see it. Again, this is one of those nasty connectors, so my suggestion is use a finger on one side, a flat screwdriver on the other, and just use some leverage and it will come off quite clean. Okay, there we go. So you could also see now the Wi-Fi antenna connector on the motherboard, and we could also remove this one, but first let's just disassemble the Blu-ray drive. Okay, now to further disassemble the Blu-ray unit, we need to remove another Torx screw which is hidden below the ribbon cable. So now you actually need to disconnect also this part and remember the orientation of the whole ribbon cable and just put it aside so you don't lose it. And here I will try and show you, just down here below the gray power cable there's a Torx screw hidden below there, and we need to remove that. So that's what we're going to do. So maybe you can see clearly now where I am removing the screw from, and it's down here. There we go. It's the usual size. So there we go. Now just pick it up. Don't lose it. And now the drive should be free to come. Oh, we need to remove also this small Phillips head screw here on the front. Just let me see if you can see it clearly in the camera. So this one on the plastic. You don't need to remove the shielding of the Blu-ray drive controller. That's something you can do it. There are 3 screws holding it in place, but it's not required for disassembly from the chassis. So you need to remove this small Phillips head screw, set it aside, and now everything should be good to go. To remove Blu-ray drive, just pull gently because there is some plastic fittings. Do not yank it out with too much force. And on the back side, basically where we were working before to detach the connector, I will show you. There we go. There is this guide for the power cable, and you just need to detach the power cable slowly from the clips which are holding it in place, and that's the way. And there we go. Just be gentle, keep an eye out on those connectors, and there we go. So this is the whole Blu-ray assembly, which opens up like this when you insert the Blu-ray and then close this down. It's quite a nice mechanism, really robust, especially in relation to the PS2 drive, which when you keep the PS2 vertical had lots of issues. So this should not be a very dirty part. There's just some dust in here. Just remove it gently. Use some air to blow it dry. Have a look if everything is okay on the mechanism. If there is a lot of dust here, the controllers of the electronics are on the upper side, and you can also give a good clean. Here, this is the front part, the one which you see basically from the metal frame, and after some time it gets dusty, so you can now clean it and make it go back to its nice black original color. So just use a bit of air and it will be fine. And that's it for the Blu-ray drive. So now we are left with the fan, which is something which we will not remove completely from the frame because it's integral to the frame, but we should be able to remove also the back plate, I think now. And so we turn this over, we remove a couple of screws here. Okay, so now we move to the back side.